The rain came down like claws. Not gentle. Not cleansing. It carved through the night in cold, vicious sheets that turned the forest floor into a treacherous mud-slicked nightmare. And she ran through it, barefoot, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged gasps that burned worse than the cuts scoring her arms and legs. Sable didn't know how long she'd been running. Time had fractured the moment the screaming started, the moment Alpha Corvin's enforcers kicked down her door and dragged her mother into the rain-soaked clearing where the entire pack had gathered like vultures circling carrion. She only knew that her feet were bleeding, that her thin dress clung to her like a second skin, and that somewhere behind her, the howls were getting closer. They were hunting her. Not because she'd done something wrong. Not because she'd broken pack law or challenged authority. They were hunting her because of what she was. What her bloodline carried. What her very existence threatened to expose. The Black Omega. The one the prophecies whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. The one who shouldn't exist. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the skeletal trees that clawed upward like the fingers of the damned, and in that brief flash of silver-white light, Sable saw it, the ravine. A jagged tear in the earth that dropped into darkness, the kind of darkness that swallowed wolves whole and never gave them back. She had two choices, face the ravine or face the pack. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. Behind her, the howls crescendoed, triumphant and savage. They'd caught her scent. They knew exactly where she was. Sable's mind raced, spiraling through memories she tried so hard to bury. Her mother's warnings, delivered in urgent whispers whenever they were alone, never shift in front of them, Sable. Never let them see what you truly are. They'll kill you for it. Her grandmother's stories about the ancient bloodline, the one that predated the Alpha King's reign, the one that carried power so volatile it had been hunted to near extinction. And then, the worst memory of all, 3 nights ago, when she'd made the mistake of defending a younger wolf from a beating, and her eyes had flared that unmistakable onyx black, darker than midnight, darker than death itself. That's when Alpha Corvin had seen. That's when everything shattered. The enforcers burst through the tree line behind her, their massive wolf forms sleek and deadly in the storm. 6 of them. All teeth and muscle and killing intent. At the front ran Garrick, the Alpha's right hand, his silver-gray fur matted with rain, his amber eyes locked on her with the focus of a predator who'd already tasted victory. Sable's feet skidded in the mud as she reached the ravine's edge. Rocks tumbled over the side, disappearing into the void without a sound. No bottom. Or at least, none she could see. Nowhere left to run, Black Omega. Garrick's voice carried over the storm, rough and mocking even in its shifted form, that halfway state between man and beast that made the words sound like gravel scraping against bone. She turned to face them, her back to the abyss, her body trembling not from cold but from the thing inside her that was screaming to be released. That dark, terrible power that lived in her marrow, that sang in her blood, that made her something other than what these wolves understood. The enforcers fanned out in a semicircle, blocking any escape route. Rain streamed down their fur, dripped from their fangs. They moved with the synchronized precision of wolves who'd hunted together for years, who knew each other's moves like a choreographed dance of death. Alpha Corvin wants you alive, Garrick said, his lips pulling back in what might have been a smile if wolves could smile. Says he needs to make an example of you. Show the pack what happens to abominations who hide among us. Abomination. The word hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd heard it before. Even though she'd whispered it to herself in the darkest hours of night, wondering if they were right about her. But then something else stirred inside her. Something that felt less like shame and more like rage. Her mother was dead. They'd killed her 3 hours ago in that clearing, ripped her apart while the pack watched, while Alpha Corvin declared that anyone who harbored Black Omega blood was a traitor to the kingdom. Her mother, who'd only ever tried to protect her, who'd sacrificed everything to keep Sable's secret safe. And now they wanted to parade her around like a trophy? Use her death as a warning? I'm done running, Sable heard herself say, and her voice didn't sound like her own anymore. It sounded older. Deeper. Like it came from somewhere ancient and furious. The enforcers tensed. Even Garrick's confidence flickered for a moment, his ears flattening against his skull. Because they felt it too. That shift in the air. That pressure building like a storm about to break. Sable's hands began to tremble, but not from fear this time. From power. From the thing she'd kept locked down her entire life, the thing she'd been taught to suppress and hide in fear. It rose up through her body like liquid fire, turning her veins to rivers of molten shadow. Her eyes went black. Completely black. No white, no iris, just pure obsidian darkness that reflected the lightning like polished stone. What? Garrick started, but he never finished the sentence. Because that's when she felt him. Someone else. Someone whose presence crashed into her awareness like a tidal wave, drowning out everything else, the rain, the enforcers, even her own fear. It was a consciousness so powerful, so overwhelming, that for a moment Sable forgot how to breathe. The enforcers felt it too. They whimpered, actually whimpered, and began backing away from her, their eyes rolling white with primal terror. And then he emerged from the darkness behind them. The Alpha King. Draven himself. He moved through the storm like he commanded it, like the rain and wind and lightning all bent to his will. His wolf form was massive, easily twice the size of Garrick, his fur so dark it was almost blue-black, and his eyes, those eyes were the color of winter ice, pale and merciless and absolutely ancient. Every wolf in that clearing dropped to their bellies in submission. Even Garrick, the proud enforcer, pressed himself flat against the mud, his head lowered, his throat exposed. But Sable didn't bow. Couldn't bow. Because she was too busy staring at the Alpha King, and he was staring right back at her, and something in that gaze felt less like threat and more like recognition. Leave, Draven said, his voice carrying over the storm without him even raising it. Pure Alpha command. Absolute authority. The enforcers didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled to their feet and vanished into the trees like smoke, abandoning their hunt, abandoning their orders, because when the Alpha King spoke, every other command became meaningless. And then it was just the two of them. Sable and Draven. The Black Omega and the Alpha King. Standing at the edge of an abyss with rain hammering down and lightning illuminating the space between them in flashes of silver fire. He shifted then, his massive wolf form melting and reforming until a man stood before her. Tall. Powerfully built. Dressed in dark clothing that clung to him like a second skin, soaked through from the rain. His face was sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in the way a blade is handsome, beautiful and dangerous. His hair was dark, pushed back from his face, and those pale eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. You're the one, he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Sable's power flared inside her, responding to his presence in a way that terrified her. Because it didn't feel like opposition. It felt like answer to call. Lock to key. Two halves of something that shouldn't fit together but somehow did. I don't know what you're talking about, she managed, her voice hoarse. A slight smile curved his mouth, but there was no warmth in it. Yes, you do. He took a step toward her. She took a step back, her heel touching empty air, reminding her exactly how close she was to falling. Careful, Draven said, and this time something almost like concern flickered in those winter eyes. That's a long way down. Why are you here? The question burst from her before she could stop it. Why did you stop them? The Alpha King tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Because I've been looking for you, Sable. For a very long time. Her name. He knew her name. And the way he said it felt intimate, like a secret shared in darkness. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, he promised, and extended his hand toward her across the rain-soaked space between them. Come with me. Let me show you what you really are. And Sable stood there, trembling at the edge of the ravine, caught between the abyss behind her and the most dangerous wolf in the kingdom reaching out his hand, while somewhere deep inside her, that dark power whispered that this moment, this exact moment, had been inevitable from the moment she was born. If you're already hooked, if you already need to know what happens next, hit that subscribe button. Because at Shayla's Romance Library, we tell stories that grab your heart and don't let go. She didn't take his hand. Not immediately. Because every instinct she'd honed over 23 years of survival screamed at her not to trust this. Not to trust him. Alpha King Draven was the wolf every mother used to frighten her children into obedience. He was the one who'd consolidated power through blood and brutality, who'd crushed 12 rebellions before she'd even reached adolescence, who ruled the kingdom of wolves with an iron fist that had never once shown mercy. And yet he stood there in the rain, hand extended, waiting with a patience that felt entirely wrong for someone with his reputation. The storm raged around them, but he didn't move, didn't press, just kept those pale eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to the darkest corners of her soul. You're afraid of me, he observed, and it wasn't mockery in his voice. It was something closer to understanding. Maybe even sadness. Everyone's afraid of you, Sable shot back, hating how her voice trembled. You've given them plenty of reasons to be. Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to name. Pain, maybe. Or regret. But then his expression hardened back into that impenetrable mask of authority. True, he acknowledged. But you're not afraid of me the way they are. You're afraid because you think I'm here to kill you. To finish what Corvin started. He lowered his hand slightly but didn't drop it. I'm not. Then what do you want? Lightning cracked overhead, so close the air tasted like ozone and burnt metal. In the flash of light, Sable saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Hunger. Not the predatory kind, though there was that too. This was different. Deeper. Like a man who'd been starving for something he couldn't name and had finally found it standing at the edge of a ravine in the middle of a storm. I want to understand what you are, Draven said quietly. I want to know why your bloodline was hunted to extinction. Why the old prophecies speak of a black Omega who would either save the kingdom or destroy it. He paused, his jaw tightening. And I want to know why, the moment I sensed your power awakened 3 nights ago, every instinct I possessed told me to find you before someone else did. 3 nights ago. When her eyes had flared black in front of Alpha Corvin. When everything had fallen apart. You felt that, she whispered. From wherever you were, you felt my power? I felt it across half the kingdom. His voice dropped lower, rough with something that might have been awe or might have been fear. It was like a signal flare in the darkness, Sable. Like something ancient waking up after centuries of sleep. Do you have any idea how impossible that should be? How much power it would take to reach that far? She didn't. She'd spent her whole life trying not to use her power, not to understand it. Every time it surfaced, her mother had looked at her with such terror that Sable had learned to shove it down, to lock it away in some deep place inside herself where it couldn't hurt anyone. But it had awakened anyway. And now the Alpha King himself stood before her, claiming he'd crossed the kingdom to find her. Corvin said my bloodline is a threat to your rule, Sable said, forcing steel into her voice even as her body shook with exhaustion and cold. He said the old texts call us abominations. Corrupted wolves who should never have been born. Corvin is a fool who reads only what serves his ambition. Draven's voice turned harsh, dangerous. The old texts don't call you abominations. They call you the firstborn. The original bloodline, before the kingdoms were divided, before alphas and omegas became the rigid hierarchy we know now. Your ancestors didn't just have power, Sable. They were power itself. The words hit her like physical blows, each one reshaping everything she thought she knew about herself. That's not possible, she breathed. If that were true, we wouldn't have been hunted. We wouldn't have been nearly wiped out. You were hunted precisely because it's true. Draven took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the rain tracking down the sharp planes of his face, could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. My great-grandfather led those hunts. Systematically destroyed every firstborn bloodline he could find because he feared what you represented. The possibility that his power wasn't absolute. That there were wolves who existed outside his control. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the voice of a king defending his legacy. This was something personal. Something that cut deep. Why are you telling me this? Sable demanded. Why would you admit that your own bloodline tried to genocide mine? Because I'm not my great-grandfather. The words came out sharp, almost angry. Because I've spent the last decade trying to undo the damage he caused, trying to piece together the truth from fragments and whispers and prophecies that have been deliberately obscured. And because, he stopped, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. Because I'm tired of ruling through fear alone. I'm tired of being the monster everyone believes I am. The rawness in his voice shocked her. This was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in existence, and he sounded lonely. Bone deep, achingly lonely. You still haven't answered my question, she said, even though part of her already knew the answer, could feel it humming in the space between them like a live wire. What do you want from me? Draven met her eyes, and this time he didn't hide what she saw there. The hunger. The hope. The desperate, dangerous need. I want you to let me protect you, he said simply. I want you to come with me so I can keep you safe from wolves like Corvin, from the counselors who will want you dead the moment they learn what you are. And I want, he hesitated, something almost vulnerable crossing his features. I want to see if the bond one felt when your power called to mine was real. Or if I've finally lost my mind after a century of this. A century. He'd lived for over 100 years, and in all that time, he'd never found a mate, Sable whispered, understanding crashing over her. You think I might be your mate? His silence was answer enough. The rain fell harder, and somewhere in the distance, thunder growled like a warning. Sable's mind spun, trying to process everything. The Alpha King thought she might be his fated mate. The same Alpha King whose bloodline had tried to destroy hers. The same Alpha King who ruled through fear and brutality and absolute control. But he'd stopped the enforcers. He'd sent them running with a single word. And he stood before her now not as a king demanding obedience but as a man asking for something he clearly had no right to ask for. Trust. If I go with you, she heard herself say, and this bond you think exists is real, what then? Your council will never accept a black Omega as your mate. Your allies will see it as weakness. Half the kingdom will call for your head. Let them try. The words were pure alpha dominance, the kind of absolute confidence that made lesser wolves bare their throats. But then his voice softened, just slightly. I've ruled through strength and fear for long enough, Sable. Maybe it's time I ruled through something else. Like what? I don't know yet. He smiled then, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, almost boyish despite the ancient weight in his eyes. That's what I'm hoping you'll help me figure out. Against every bit of common sense she possessed, Sable felt herself reaching for his hand. Not because she trusted him completely. Not because she believed this would end well. But because standing at the edge of this ravine, soaked through and exhausted and alone, she realized she had nothing left to lose. Her mother was dead. Her pack wanted her executed. And somewhere inside her, that dark power stirred with recognition every time she looked at Draven, like it had been waiting her entire life to find him. Their fingers touched, and the world exploded. Not literally. But the sensation was so intense it might as well have been. Power arced between them, black meeting ice blue, and Sable gasped as she felt his essence pour into her awareness. Saw flashes of his memories, centuries of war, of loneliness, of making impossible choices that saved the kingdom while destroying pieces of his soul. Felt his bone-deep exhaustion and his desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be the thing that made it all worthwhile. And he was feeling her too. She knew because his grip tightened, his eyes widening as he experienced her pain, her loss, her terror and rage and that small, stubborn core of strength that had kept her alive when everything else tried to break her. When the connection finally eased enough for her to breathe again, they were both shaking. That was, she started. The bond, he finished hoarsely. It's real. Holy gods, Sable, it's real. Before she could respond, before she could process what this meant, a howl shattered the night. Not one of Corvin's enforcers. This was different. Older. More dangerous. Draven's entire body went rigid, his head snapping toward the sound. We need to move, he said urgently, already pulling her away from the ravine's edge. Now. What was that? His jaw clenched. That was the Council's shadow wolves. They'd been tracking me since I left the capital. He met her eyes, and she saw genuine fear there for the first time. They're the ones I didn't tell about you. The ones who would kill you on sight. Another howl, closer now. Then another. They were surrounded. And Sable realized that being saved by the Alpha King might have just made her an even bigger target than before. They ran. Not like she'd run from Corvin's enforcers, desperate and blind with panic. This was different. Draven's hand wrapped around hers, steady and sure, guiding her through the darkness like he could see perfectly despite the storm. Maybe he could. He was ancient, after all. 100 years of hunting and being hunted would teach you how to navigate any terrain, any weather, any threat. The shadow wolves' howls echoed through the forest, coming from multiple directions now, circling them like a noose pulling tight. Sable's legs burned, her bare feet screaming in protest as they hit rocks and roots and thorns, but she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Because those howls carried a promise of death that was somehow worse than what Corvin had planned for her. At least Corvin wanted her alive long enough to make a spectacle of her execution. The shadow wolves didn't sound interested in taking prisoners. Here, Draven said, pulling her sharply to the right, toward what looked like solid rock face. But as they got closer, Sable saw the narrow crevice, barely wide enough for a wolf to slip through. He released her hand just long enough to shift the rock aside, actually moved a boulder that must have weighed 300 pounds like it was made of paper, revealing a hidden cave entrance. Inside. Quickly. She didn't argue. The moment they were through, he pulled the boulder back into place with a grinding sound that set her teeth on edge. Darkness swallowed them whole, so complete she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. Then light bloomed. Soft and blue-white, coming from Draven's palm. Not fire. Something else. Something that felt old and strange and made the air taste like winter. Alpha magic, she whispered, staring at the light dancing across his fingers. A gift from my bloodline. He moved deeper into the cave, the light revealing a space larger than she'd expected, with smooth walls that looked almost carved. We're safe here for now. The rock is threaded with silver ore. It masks our scent, dampens our power signature. The shadow wolves will search but they won't find us. Sable wanted to feel relieved. Instead, she felt trapped. Because now she was alone with the Alpha King in a cave that no one else could find, and the reality of what she'd done, taking his hand, trusting him, crashed over her like a physical weight. She backed against the far wall, her arms wrapping around herself as tremors overtook her body. Not from cold, though her soaked dress clung to her like ice. From shock. From grief. From the overwhelming impossibility of everything that had happened in the last few hours. "You're safe," Draven said quietly, staying near the entrance, giving her space. "I promise you, Sable. I won't let them hurt you. My mother is dead." The words came out flat, emotionless, because if she let herself feel them she would shatter completely. They killed her in front of the entire pack. Made everyone watch while they tore her apart because she protected me. Because she kept my secret. She saw his jaw tighten in the blue-white light. "I know. I felt it when it happened. Felt your grief spike across the bond, even though it hadn't fully formed yet. You felt that, but you didn't stop it." Anger flared hot in her chest, burning away the numbness. "You're the Alpha King. You could have saved her. You could have." "I was 300 miles away when it happened," he cut in, and his voice was rough with something that sounded like guilt. "By the time I reached Corvin's territory, your mother was already gone. I'm sorry, Sable. If I could have saved her, I would have." The sincerity in his voice deflated her rage, left her hollow. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold stone floor, her knees pulled to her chest, and finally let herself remember. Her mother's face. Not as it had looked in those final moments, she refused to remember that, but as it had been throughout Sable's childhood. Tired, always tired, with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. But warm too. Loving. Fierce in her protection of the daughter she knew the world would fear. "She told me stories," Sable said quietly, staring at nothing. "When I was little, before I understood what I was. She'd tell me about our ancestors. The firstborn. She made them sound like heroes from legends. Wolves who could shift under the new moon, not just the full. Wolves whose power came from the earth itself, from something older than the kingdoms, older than the Alphas." Draven moved closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. He sat down against the opposite wall, leaving a careful distance between them. The light still glowed from his palm, casting strange shadows across the cave. "The stories are true," he said. "At least, the parts my scholars have been able to verify. The firstborn were the original shifters. Before the Alpha bloodlines rose to power, before the hierarchy was established, your ancestors were the ones who walked between the human and wolf worlds. They were respected. Revered, even. Then what happened?" Sable looked at him, needing to understand. "How did we go from revered to hunted?" His expression darkened. "Fear. Politics. The rise of the Alpha bloodlines meant consolidating power, and your ancestors represented something that couldn't be controlled. They didn't submit to Alpha dominance. Couldn't submit. It wasn't in their nature. So my great-grandfather and the other ruling Alphas decided that anything they couldn't control was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Genocide," Sable said flatly. "That's what it was. Systematic genocide." "Yes." He didn't flinch from the word. Dressed up as protection of the realm, as preventing corruption of the bloodlines, as a dozen other justifications. But at its core, it was genocide. And by the time my grandfather took the throne, it was too late to stop. The firstborn were scattered, hiding, dying out. He tried to offer amnesty but no one trusted it. Too much blood had been spilled. Sable pressed her palm against the stone floor, feeling the coolness seep into her skin. Her mother had been born into hiding. Had lived her entire life in fear, moving from pack to pack, never staying long enough to put down roots. Always watching. Always afraid that someone would see past the carefully constructed lies and realize what she was. "My grandmother was the last one to remember the old ways," Sable said softly. She died when I was 7, but before she passed, she made my mother promise to teach me. To make sure I knew where I came from. What I carried inside me. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I used to think it was a curse. This power that I had to hide, that I couldn't let anyone see. I prayed to be normal. To be just a regular Omega who could blend in and live a quiet life. But you're not an Omega. Draven's voice was gentle but firm. Not in the way the kingdoms define it. The black eyes, the power signature, those mark you as something else entirely. Something the hierarchies can't classify because you predate them. She met his gaze across the cave. What am I, then? He was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes studying her with that same intensity that made her feel exposed and seen all at once. I don't know the full answer yet. But I know this, when your power awakened 3 nights ago, every ancient ward in the capital flared to life. Protections that haven't activated in 2 centuries suddenly blazed bright enough to wake half the court. The scholars went mad trying to figure out what had triggered them. And you knew it was me. I suspected. The wards only respond to firstborn magic, and we thought that bloodline was extinct. When I felt the pull toward you, he trailed off, running a hand through his wet hair. It was like every cell in my body knew exactly where you were. Knew I had to reach you before anyone else did. Sable's chest tightened. The bond. He kept coming back to the bond, this impossible connection that apparently transcended centuries of enmity between their bloodlines. My mother warned me about alpha bonds, she said quietly. Told me that for wolves like us, bonding could be dangerous. That our power would try to merge with an alpha's, and the alpha would either try to dominate it or would be consumed by it. She said it had happened before. Said it was one of the reasons the firstborn were hunted, because when we bonded with powerful alphas, the offspring were too powerful. Too unpredictable. Draven's expression shifted into something complicated. Not quite fear, but close. Is that why you're afraid? You think I'll try to dominate your power? I think you're the Alpha King, she said bluntly. I think control is in your nature. And I think this power inside me has spent 23 years locked in a cage, and it's angry. It wants out. It wants to burn everything that's hurt me. She looked down at her hands, remembering the way they'd trembled with barely restrained energy when the enforcers had cornered her. I don't know if I can control it. And I definitely don't know what happens if your power and mine try to occupy the same space. Then we figure it out together. He said it like it was simple. Like they hadn't just met. Like the fate of the kingdom wasn't potentially hanging in the balance. You're insane, she breathed. Do you understand what you're risking? If the bond is real and it goes wrong, it could kill us both. At minimum, it could destroy your control over your own power. You'd lose everything you've built. I know. His voice was calm. Certain. But I also know that for the first time in a century, I don't feel alone. For the first time since I took the throne, I feel like there might be a purpose to all of this beyond just survival and maintaining order. You make me feel. He stopped, his jaw working like he was struggling to find words for something he'd never had to articulate before. Human. You make me feel human again, Sable. Like I'm more than just a title and a burden and a legacy of violence I didn't ask for. The vulnerability in his admission hit her harder than any declaration of power could have. Because this wasn't the Alpha King speaking. This was just Draven. A wolf who'd lived too long, carried too much, and had somehow convinced himself that she, broken, hunted, terrified, might be the answer to a loneliness he'd been drowning in for decades. I don't know how to be what you need, she whispered. I don't even know how to be what I need. Then we learned together. He extended his hand again, palm up, an offering. No promises beyond this moment. No grand declarations. Just, don't face this alone. Let me stand with you. Sable stared at his hand, at the light still glowing softly from his palm, illuminating the scars that marked his skin. Battle scars. Wounds from 100 years of war and sacrifice and impossible choices. She thought about her mother's final words, shouted across the clearing as the enforcers dragged Sable away. Run, baby. Run and don't look back. Don't let them make you afraid of what you are. Maybe accepting Draven's help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the first step towards stopping the running. Towards standing and fighting and finally claiming the power that had terrified her for so long. She reached out and took his hand. The bond flared again, gentler this time but no less profound. And in that moment, Sable understood something that both thrilled and terrified her. Whatever happened next, whatever battles they faced, she would never be invisible again. The Black Omega had been found. And the world was about to learn exactly what that meant. They stayed in the cave until dawn. Not sleeping. Neither of them could sleep with the shadow wolves prowling somewhere outside, with the bond humming between them like a living thing, with too many questions and not enough answers pressing down on both their minds. Draven had conjured more of that strange alpha light, enough to illuminate the entire cave, and Sable had finally gotten a good look at where they'd taken refuge. The walls weren't just smooth, they were carved. Intricate patterns spiraled across the stone, symbols she didn't recognize but that made something deep inside her resonate with recognition. Like a song she'd heard once, long ago, and had almost forgotten. "Do you know what this place is?" she asked, running her fingers over one of the carvings. The stone was warm under her touch, which didn't make sense. Stone shouldn't be warm this deep underground. Draven stood near the entrance, his body tense, listening for any sign of pursuit. But at her question, he turned, his eyes tracking to where she touched the wall. His expression shifted into something between awe and concern. "It's a sanctuary," he said quietly. "One of the old ones. I didn't realize. I was just looking for shelter. I didn't know we'd find this." "A sanctuary for what?" He moved closer, studying the carvings with an intensity that suggested he was reading them like text. "For the firstborn. These were sacred spaces, hidden throughout the kingdom, where your ancestors would come to connect with their power. To perform rituals. He paused, his finger tracing a particular symbol, a circle with what looked like flames radiating from its center. To awaken. The word sent a chill down Sable's spine. Awaken what? Their full potential. Draven's voice had gone soft, almost reverent. The firstborn weren't born with all their power. It came in stages, triggered by specific events or rituals. The black eyes you manifested, that's just the first stage. The scholar's text suggests there were at least 4 more levels of transformation. Sable pulled her hand away from the wall like it had burned her. "You're saying I'm not even fully awakened yet? That what happened with Corvin's enforcers was just the beginning?" "I think so." He looked at her, and there was something in his gaze that might have been excitement or might have been fear. Possibly both. The sanctuary responding to your presence, the walls warming to your touch, those are signs, Sable. This place recognizes you. It's been waiting for you. That's impossible. I've never been here before. I didn't even know places like this existed. Your bloodline knew. He gestured to the carvings, the patterns that seemed to pulse faintly with their own inner light now that she was paying attention. These sanctuaries were tied to firstborn magic. They were hidden, protected, designed to remain dormant until someone with the right bloodline came close enough to wake them. The fact that you found this place, that I found this place while connected to you through the bond, it's not coincidence. Sable wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth emanating from the walls. "I don't want to awaken. I don't want more power. I just want to survive." "I know." Draven's voice was gentle, understanding. "But I don't think you're going to get that choice. Your power is already waking up, with or without your permission. The question is whether you let it happen in a controlled way, in a place like this where the magic can guide you, or whether you let it explode out of you in the middle of a fight where it could kill everyone around you. The brutal honesty of his words hit her like a slap. Because he was right. She'd felt it building inside her ever since her eyes had turned black, that pressure, that sense of something enormous trying to claw its way to the surface. It had terrified her. Still terrified her. But maybe terror wasn't the answer anymore. Maybe it was time to stop running from what she was. If I do this, she said slowly, if I let this place awaken me, or whatever it's supposed to do, what happens? What am I going to become? Draven was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. I don't know. The texts about the firstborn are fragmented, deliberately obscured by those who wanted your kind erased from history. But there are prophecies. Old ones. They speak of a black Omega who would rise when the kingdom needed her most. Who would either unite the packs or destroy them all. That's not ominous at all, Sable muttered, but her heart was racing. Which am I supposed to do? Unite or destroy? The prophecies don't say. They're deliberately vague, the way prophecies always are. But they do mention specific signs. He pointed to another carving, this one depicting a wolf with flames pouring from its body. The one with fire in her veins. The one who walks between worlds. The one whose bond will either crown a king or dethrone him. Sable's breath caught. Your bond with me. That's part of the prophecy too. So it would seem. His smile was wry, almost bitter. When I first read those texts, I thought they were metaphorical. Ancient warnings about the dangers of firstborn power. I never imagined, he trailed off, shaking his head. I never imagined I would be the king in question. That I would feel the bond pull towards someone who might be destined to destroy everything I've built. The raw vulnerability in his admission made her chest ache. And you still came for me. Still claimed the bond. Why? Because living without it felt like dying slowly. The words came out rough, almost angry, like he resented admitting them. Because I'm tired of making every decision based on fear and strategy and what's best for the kingdom. For once, just once, I wanted to make a choice based on what I needed. What my wolf needed. And it needs you, Sable. Even if you're my downfall. She should have been afraid. Should have been questioning his sanity, her own sanity, the entire impossible situation. But instead, she felt something else stirring inside her. Not the wild, terrifying power that wanted to burn everything. Something deeper. Older. Like a voice that had been sleeping for generations was finally waking up and whispering truths she'd been too afraid to hear. Show me, she heard herself say. Show me how to use the sanctuary. Draven's eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? Once we start this, there's no going back. You'll never be able to hide what you are again. I'm already past hiding. She looked down at her hands, remembering the way the black power had flared from them when the enforcers had cornered her. Corvin saw what I am. His enforcers saw. By now, word has spread to half the packs in the kingdom. Hiding isn't an option anymore. So I might as well learn to control this thing before it controls me. A slow smile curved Draven's mouth, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. Made him look almost boyish despite the ancient weight he carried. All right. But I'm warning you, this is going to hurt. Awakenings always do. Everything hurts lately, Sable said flatly. At least this time I'll have something to show for it. He laughed, short and surprised, like he hadn't expected humor from her. Then his expression turned serious, focused. The carvings are a map. They'll guide you through the ritual, but you have to be the one to activate them. I can't do it for you. How do I activate them? Blood. He said it simply, like it was obvious. Your bloodline is the key. A few drops on the central altar should be enough to start the process. Of course it required blood. Why would ancient magical rituals ever be simple? Sable moved toward the center of the cave where the carvings converged into a circular pattern on the floor. In the middle sat a stone that looked different from the others, darker, smoother, with veins of something that might have been silver or might have been starlight running through it. The altar. She knelt beside it, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. The moment everything changed. No more hiding. No more pretending to be something she wasn't. Sable. Draven's voice stopped her just as she was about to bite her palm. Whatever happens in there, whatever you see or feel, remember that I'm here. The bond connects us. If you need me, just reach for it and I'll pull you back. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she bit down hard on the soft flesh of her palm, tearing the skin until blood welled up, hot and coppery. She let 3 drops fall onto the altar stone. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world exploded into light. Not the gentle blue-white of Draven's alpha magic. This was different. Darker. The color of midnight and smoke in ancient forests that had never seen sunlight. The carvings on the walls blazed to life, each symbol burning with black fire that didn't consume, that simply was. And Sable felt herself falling. Not physically. Her body stayed kneeling beside the altar. But her consciousness plummeted down, down into something that felt like memory but couldn't be. Because these weren't her memories. They were older. They belonged to someone, something else. She saw wolves running under a moonless sky, their pelts shimmering with power that made the air itself shimmer. Saw a woman standing on a cliff edge, her arms raised, calling lightning from the heavens with nothing but her will. Saw battles fought not with tooth and claw but with pure magic, reality itself bending to the firstborn's command. And she saw the purge. Saw alpha armies descending on villages where the firstborn lived in peace. Saw children torn from their mothers. Saw the sacred sanctuaries burned and defiled. Saw her ancestors hunted like animals, their power stolen, their bodies displayed as warnings. The grief and rage that came with those visions nearly shattered her. She wanted to scream, to rage, to burn down everyone who had participated in that genocide. But then another voice cut through the chaos. Old. Female. Powerful. Child of ash and shadow. Child of fire and fury. You carry our legacy in your blood. Our pain in your bones. But you also carry our hope. The voice wrapped around her like a cloak, steadying her, anchoring her to something solid in the midst of all this chaos. The prophecy is real, little one. You are the last. The one who will choose. Unite or destroy. Crown or dethrone. Life or death. I don't want to choose, Sable gasped, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking aloud or just thinking. I don't want this responsibility. Then you will die, and our line will end with you. The choice is already made. The only question is which path you will walk. The visions shifted again, and this time Sable saw herself. But different. Older. Stronger. Her eyes were completely black, no white remaining, and flames, actual black flames, danced along her skin without burning her. She stood beside Draven, their hands clasped, and around them the entire kingdom knelt in reverence or fear. Unity. Power. A new order rising from the ashes of the old. Then the vision fractured, showing her another path. Herself standing alone, wreathed in fire, while the world burned. Draven lay dead at her feet, his throat torn out, and around them the kingdom was nothing but ash and screaming. Destruction. Vengeance. The complete annihilation of everything the Alphas had built. Both futures are real. Both are possible. You will choose with every action, every breath, every moment between now and the prophecy's fulfillment. Choose wisely, daughter of the firstborn. The fate of every wolf alive rests on your shoulders. The voice faded, the visions dissolved, and Sable crashed back into her body with a gasp that felt like drowning in reverse. Draven was there instantly, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. Sable. Sable, look at me. Are you all right? She looked up at him, and his eyes widened. She didn't need a mirror to know what he was seeing. Could feel the power thrumming through her veins, hot and electric and terrifying. Her eyes had gone black again, but this time they stayed that way. This time, the power didn't recede. This time, the awakening had begun. And there was no going back. The power didn't fade. Sable had expected it to recede like it always had before, a brief flare and then back down into the depths where she could pretend it didn't exist. But this time, it stayed. Coursing through her veins like liquid fire, making every nerve ending sing with awareness. She could feel everything. The texture of the stone beneath her knees. The warmth of Draven's hands on her shoulders. The pulse of ancient magic still thrumming through the sanctuary walls. And beyond that, she could feel more. The forest outside, every tree and living thing within 100 yards, all of it connected to her through invisible threads. The shadow wolves prowling in the distance, their hunger and determination tasting like metal on her tongue. Even the earth itself, deep and patient and vast, acknowledging her presence in a way that made her feel simultaneously infinite and terrifyingly small. Your eyes, Draven said quietly, his thumb brushing her cheek. Not pulling away. Not afraid. Just observing. They're not flickering anymore. The black is constant. I know. Her voice sounded different too. Deeper. Like it carried echoes of that ancient female voice from the vision. I can feel it. Everything. It's like I was blind before and now I can finally see. What else do you feel? His question was careful, clinical almost. The voice of someone who needed to understand what he was dealing with. Sable closed her eyes, reaching into the new awareness. The shadow wolves. 6 of them. They've circled back, searching. They know we're here somewhere but the silver in the rock is confusing them. She paused, sensing something else. Something that made her blood run cold. They're not alone anymore. Someone else is coming. Someone powerful. Draven went still, his alpha senses extending outward. How far? Maybe half a mile. Moving fast. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. It's not just power I'm sensing from them. It's authority. Old authority. Like they've been in control for a very long time and they're used to being obeyed. His jaw clenched. The council. They've sent an elder. The way he said it made it clear this was bad. Worse than the shadow wolves. Worse than Corvin's enforcers. Who are the elders? Sable asked, even though part of her didn't want to know. The Council of Elders are the oldest alphas in the kingdom. Some of them are older than me. They're the ones who hold the real power. I may be the Alpha King in name, but they're the ones who control the bloodlines, the territories, the ancient laws. His expression darkened. And they're the ones most invested in keeping things exactly as they are. If they've sent an elder here personally, it means they know about you. About what you are. How could they know? We've been hidden since. The wards. Understanding crashed across Draven's features, harsh and bitter. When your power awakened in the capital, the elders would have felt it too. They have access to the same ancient protections I do. They just didn't know what it meant until I left to find you. He cursed, low and vicious. They've been tracking me. Using me to lead them straight to the last firstborn. Guilt stabbed through Sable's chest. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't. His grip on her shoulders tightened, not painful but firm. This isn't your fault. If anyone's to blame, it's me. I should have been more careful. Should have hidden my trail better. He released her, standing in one fluid motion. We need to leave. Now. Before they trap us in here. But even as he said it, Sable felt the threads of awareness she'd gained snag on something. The shadow wolves were closing in, moving with renewed purpose. And that powerful presence, the Elder, was almost on top of them. It's too late, she said quietly. They're already here. As if summoning them with her words, the boulder blocking the entrance exploded inward. Not rolled aside. Exploded. Shards of rock sprayed across the cave floor as a figure stepped through the dust and debris, backlit by the weak dawn light filtering through the forest canopy. The shadow wolves followed, flanking him like an honor guard, their red eyes fixed on Sable with unmistakable hunger. The Elder was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair pulled back from a face that might have been handsome once but had been hardened by centuries into something cruel and cold. He wore traditional council robes, deep crimson edged with gold, and power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Not as overwhelming as Draven's, but old. Ancient. The kind of power that came from surviving longer than everyone else and learning how to use that survival as a weapon. Alpha King. The Elder's voice was smooth, cultured, with an edge that suggested every word was chosen deliberately. How fortuitous. We've been searching for you since you left the capital without informing the council of your intentions. Draven moved to stand between the Elder and Sable, his body language pure alpha dominance. Elder Stellan. I wasn't aware I needed the council's permission to travel within my own kingdom. Of course not. Stellan's smile didn't reach his eyes. But when the Alpha King abandons his duties to chase rumors of a supposedly extinct bloodline, the council becomes concerned. Particularly when those rumors prove to be true. His gaze shifted past Draven, landing on Sable with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Those eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, traveled over her like he was cataloging every detail. Assessing. Judging. Finding her lacking. The Black Omega, he said softly, and there was something in his voice that turned the title into an insult. I thought your kind had been properly dealt with generations ago. Yet here you stand, in one of the old sanctuaries no less, having undergone the first awakening if those eyes are any indication. He shook his head slowly, like a teacher disappointed in a wayward student. This is problematic. She's under my protection, Draven said, his voice dropping into that register of absolute authority. You will not touch her. Your protection. Stellan laughed, sharp and mocking. My dear boy, you don't seem to understand the situation. The council didn't send me here to ask your permission. We sent me here to clean up a mistake that should have been corrected a century ago. He gestured to the shadow wolves, who began spreading out, cutting off any potential escape routes. The firstborn are extinct for a reason. They were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too unwilling to submit to proper authority. Your great-grandfather understood this. Your grandfather and father understood this. But you, his lip curled. You've always been soft. Too concerned with reform and progress and other useless sentiments. Which is why the council has decided that your judgment in this matter cannot be trusted. Sable felt the rage building inside her, hot and fierce. This wolf, this ancient, entitled creature, was talking about genocide like it was pest control. Like her mother, her grandmother, all her ancestors who'd been hunted and killed were nothing more than problems to be solved. The black fire that had awakened in the sanctuary stirred in response to her fury, and she felt Draven tense as he sensed it through their bond. You want to declare me unfit? Draven's voice was dangerously soft. You think the council has the authority to overrule the Alpha King? When the Alpha King has been compromised by a bond to an abomination? Yes. Stellan said it without hesitation, without remorse. The bond can be broken, of course. We have wolves skilled in such things. It will be painful, but you'll survive. And once you're freed from her influence, once you can think clearly again, you'll understand that we did this for your own good. For the good of the kingdom. And what happens to her? Draven asked, though Sable suspected he already knew the answer. Stellan's smile was cold as winter. The same thing that happened to all the others. She dies. Quickly, if she cooperates. Slowly, if she doesn't. Either way, the firstborn bloodline ends today, and the kingdom returns to proper order. The shadow wolves crept closer, their muscles coiled to spring. Sable could feel their anticipation, their eagerness for violence. They'd been bred for this, hunting down threats to the council's power, eliminating anyone who didn't fit into the rigid hierarchy. There's 6 of them and 2 of us, she said quietly to Draven, her mind racing through options. Plus an elder who probably has centuries of combat experience. We can't fight our way out of this. I know. His response was just as quiet, but there was steel underneath. Which is why we're not going to fight. We're going to negotiate. Negotiate? She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. He just said he's going to kill me and break our bond. What exactly is there to negotiate? Everything. Draven stepped forward, his posture shifting from defensive to commanding. Elder Stellan. You're right that the council has concerns. Valid concerns about the implications of a firstborn's return. But killing her won't make those concerns go away. It will just ensure that we never understand what we're dealing with. What if there are others? What if the bloodline isn't as extinct as we thought? Wouldn't it be wiser to study this, to understand it, before resorting to the same brutal tactics that created this problem in the first place? Stellan's expression didn't change, but Sable caught the flicker of consideration in his eyes. You're suggesting we take her prisoner. Study her like some laboratory specimen. I'm suggesting we approach this with intelligence instead of fear, Draven countered. The prophecies speak of a black Omega who could unite the kingdom or destroy it. What if we're standing at a crossroads? What if killing her is what triggers the destruction, not preventing it? It was a good argument. A smart argument. And for a moment, Sable thought it might actually work. Then Stellan's gaze sharpened, and she felt his power lash out, not at her but past her, toward the sanctuary walls where the carving still glowed with residual black fire. She's already undergone the first awakening, he said flatly. Which means she's already too dangerous to be allowed to live. The prophecies don't matter if we eliminate the threat before it can fully manifest. He raised his hand, and the shadow wolves tensed. I appreciate your attempt at negotiation, Alpha King. It shows you've retained some political instincts despite your compromised state. But the council's decision is final. Step aside, or I'll be forced to report that you actively interfered with a sanctioned elimination. And that would be unfortunate for your reign. The threat was clear. Cooperate or lose the throne. Sable felt Draven's fury spike through the bond, felt him calculating odds and options and finding all of them wanting. He couldn't fight an elder and 6 shadow wolves while protecting her. He'd lose. And even if he somehow won, the council would use his defiance as grounds to remove him from power. He was trapped. They both were. I won't step aside, Draven said, his voice absolute. Final. You want her, you go through me. Stellan sighed, like this was tedious rather than tragic. So be it. Shadow wolves, take the king alive. Kill the abomination. The wolves launched forward as one, a coordinated strike designed to separate and overwhelm. And Sable felt something inside her snap. Not break. Snap into place. Like a lock finally finding its key. The black fire that had been simmering since the awakening exploded outward, not wild but controlled, precise, wrapping around her like armor made of living shadow. The lead shadow wolf crashed into it and rebounded with a yelp of pain, smoke rising from its fur where the flames had touched. No, Sable said, and her voice carried that ancient echo again, amplified by the sanctuary's power. You don't get to hunt us anymore. You don't get to decide who lives and who dies based on fear. That ends now. Elder Stellan's eyes widened, genuine shock breaking through his cold composure. Impossible. The first awakening shouldn't grant that level of control. But Sable wasn't listening. She was reaching deeper into the power, into the connection she'd felt to the earth and the forest and every living thing within her awareness. She was calling to them, asking, not demanding, asking, for help. And they answered. The sanctuary walls blazed with black fire. The ground beneath them trembled. And from the forest outside, howls rose up, not from the shadow wolves, but from others. Wild wolves. Rogues. Wolves who'd been rejected by the packs, who'd lived on the fringes, who'd survived outside the rigid hierarchy. They were coming. Drawn by her call. By the promise of something different. Run, Sable said to Draven, her eyes never leaving Stellan. Run, and I'll hold them here. I'm not leaving you. You have to. She looked at him then, and saw her reflection in his pale eyes. Saw the black flames dancing across her skin, saw the power that made her something other than what she'd been. The council wants to break our bond. If they do that while we're both here, it will kill us. You need to get back to the capital. You need to warn the others. Tell them what's coming. What's coming? His voice was raw with the agony of the choice she was forcing on him. Sable smiled, fierce and wild and free. Revolution. Then she pushed him, not physically, but through the bond, a surge of power that propelled him backward through the cave entrance and into the forest beyond. She felt his protest, his rage, his desperation to return. And she sealed the sanctuary behind him with a wall of black fire that nothing could cross. Now it was just her and Elder Stellan and the Shadow Wolves, and the ancient power that had finally stopped hiding. You've made a grave mistake, girl, Stellan said, his own power flaring to life, gold and crimson and brutal. You cannot win this fight. Maybe not, Sable agreed, the flames around her intensifying. But I can make sure you remember me. Make sure every wolf in this kingdom knows that the firstborn aren't extinct. That we're done being afraid. And as the elder and his wolves attacked, as Sable threw herself into a battle she might not survive, one thought echoed through her mind. She'd been running her whole life. Finally, she was standing and fighting back. And gods help anyone who got in her way. The battle lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of black fire against ancient alpha magic. 3 hours of shadow wolves lunging and retreating, their fur singed, their eyes filled with a fear they'd never known before. 3 hours of Elder Stellan throwing everything he had at her while Sable stood her ground in the sanctuary, drawing power from the earth itself, from the carvings on the walls, from something deep and primal that refused to let her fall. When it finally ended, Stellan retreated. Not defeated. But not victorious either. He'd lost 2 shadow wolves, consumed entirely by her flames when they'd pressed too hard, too fast. The others bore wounds that would take weeks to heal. And Stellan himself had a burn across his left arm that smoked even as he withdrew, his face twisted with fury and something that might have been respect. This isn't over, he'd said, standing at the edge of the forest while Sable remained wreathed in protective fire. The council will hear of this. They'll send more. Stronger. Let them come, Sable had replied, and meant it. Now, hours later, the adrenaline had finally crashed. The black fire had receded back into her skin, leaving her trembling and exhausted. The sanctuary's power had dimmed, no longer blazing but settling into a gentle pulse that matched her heartbeat. And Sable sat alone in the cave, her back against the carved wall, wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant. She'd sent Draven away. Pushed him through the bond with enough force that he couldn't resist. She'd felt his presence retreat through the forest, felt his anguish and rage and the bone-deep need to return to her. But she'd held the barrier, kept him out, because if Stellan had managed to break their bond while they were both present. She didn't let herself finish that thought. The sun was setting when she finally felt him again. Not trying to breach the barrier. Just there. Waiting on the other side with a patience that felt like its own kind of agony. Sable stood on shaking legs and let the wall of black fire dissolve. Draven was through the entrance before the last flames faded, moving with that impossible alpha speed, and then his hands were on her face, tilting her head up, his eyes scanning her for injuries with an intensity that bordered on manic. "You're hurt," he said, his thumb brushing over a cut on her cheek she hadn't even noticed. "Your arms." "I'm fine." She caught his hands, stilling them. "It looks worse than it is. Most of the blood isn't even mine." That wasn't entirely true. She had burns on her palms from channeling so much power, cuts along her ribs where one of the shadow wolves had gotten too close, bruises blooming across her shoulders and back. But she was alive. Whole. That had to count for something. Draven pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with a desperation that made her chest ache. She felt him trembling, felt the fear and relief and fury pouring through the bond in waves that threatened to overwhelm her already fragile control. "Don't ever do that again," he said into her hair, his voice rough. "Don't ever push me away like that." "I thought," he stopped, his grip tightening. "I thought I was going to lose you before we'd even begun." Sable's arms came up, circling his waist, holding on just as tightly. "I'm sorry. But if I hadn't sent you away, if Stellan had broken the bond while we were both there." "I know." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his pale eyes blazing with emotion. "I know why you did it. That doesn't mean I have to like it. That doesn't mean it didn't feel like dying." The raw honesty in his words cracked something open inside her. Because he wasn't hiding behind his title or his authority. He was just Draven, a wolf who'd found his mate and nearly lost her in the same breath. "I held them off," she said quietly. "Killed 2 shadow wolves. Wounded the others." Stellan retreated, but he said the council would send more. "They will." Draven's expression hardened. "Stellan is powerful, but he's just one elder. The council has 7. If they decide you're a genuine threat, they'll send all of them. And even with your power, even with the sanctuary's help, you can't fight 7 elders and their forces. So what do we do?" He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her arm. "We change the game. Stop reacting and start acting. You called the wild wolves during the fight, I felt it through the bond. They came to you. Responded to your power." Sable nodded. There were at least 20 of them. Rogues, outcasts, wolves who'd been rejected by the packs. They didn't attack Stellan directly, but they circled, distracted his forces, gave me openings. Because they sense what you are. What you represent. Draven's eyes lit with something that might have been hope or might have been dangerous ambition. The firstborn weren't just powerful, Sable. They were unifiers. They existed outside the hierarchy, which meant wolves from any rank could follow them without betraying their alpha. You could build an army. Not of pack wolves who are bound by loyalty and law, but of the forgotten ones. The ones the system failed. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. "You're talking about revolution." Real revolution. Not just me surviving but actively challenging the Council's power. I'm talking about giving you a chance to do more than just survive. He cupped her face in his hands, his gaze intense. The prophecy said you would either unite the kingdom or destroy it. Maybe it's time to choose which path you're walking. Because right now, you're caught in the middle, and that's the most dangerous place to be. Sable searched his face, looking for any sign that this was manipulation. That he was using her, positioning her as a tool for his own political goals. But all she found was sincerity. And something deeper. Something that looked like faith. You really believe I could do this, she said softly. Unite wolves who've spent centuries hating each other. I believe you already started. His smile was small but genuine. You unified rogues and outcasts with a single call. You fought an elder to a standstill during your first real battle. You survived what should have killed you a dozen times over. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. You're stronger than you know, Sable. Braver than you believe. And I think, if you let yourself trust in that strength, there's nothing you couldn't accomplish. His words wrapped around her like a balm, soothing wounds she hadn't known were bleeding. Because no one had ever looked at her like this. Like she was capable. Like she mattered beyond just being a problem to solve or a threat to eliminate. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why do you believe in me so much? You barely know me. I know enough. His voice dropped lower, intimate. I know you protected your mother even when it cost you everything. I know you stood your ground when most wolves would have run. I know you pushed me away to save my life even though it meant facing your enemies alone. His thumb brushed her lower lip. And I know that when I look at you, I see the first thing in a century that's made me want to be better than what I am. The vulnerability in his confession stole her breath. This was the Alpha King, admitting that she, broken, hunted, terrified, made him want to change. Made him want to be more than just the brutal enforcer of the Council's will. I don't know how to be what you need, she whispered, echoing the words she'd said in the cave before. But this time they felt less like fear and more like honesty. Then we figure it out together. He said it like a vow. Like a promise that actually meant something. No more running. No more hiding. We face this, whatever comes, as equals. As partners. His eyes searched hers. As mates, if you'll have me. The formal claiming. He was asking for the formal claiming, the bond that would tie them together permanently, irrevocably. In wolf culture, it was the most sacred commitment. Once claimed, their bond couldn't be broken without killing them both. It was also incredibly dangerous. Because if the Council managed to kill one of them, the other would die too. They would be each other's greatest strength and greatest vulnerability. The Council will use it against us, Sable said, even as her wolf rose up inside her, howling with need for this bond, this completion. They'll target whichever one of us is weaker, knowing it will destroy us both. Let them try. Draven's voice was pure alpha confidence. I've been weak for a century, Sable. Ruled by fear and obligation and the weight of responsibilities I never wanted. But with you, he pulled back slightly, letting her see the truth in his eyes. With you, I feel strong. Complete. Like I finally understand what I was fighting for all along. And if I choose destruction over unity, she asked, needing him to understand what he was risking. If the prophecy is right and I'm destined to burn down everything you've built? Then we burn it together. He said it without hesitation. And build something better from the ashes. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that they could face anything as long as they faced it together, finally broke through the last of her resistance. Yes, Sable breathed. Yes, I'll complete the bond. I'll be your mate. The smile that crossed his face was devastating. Pure joy mixed with relief mixed with hunger. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, and the bond that had been humming between them since the moment they touched exploded into something vast and permanent and utterly unbreakable. Power arced between them, black fire and ice blue light intertwining, creating something new. Something that had never existed before. Sable felt his memories pouring into her awareness. Saw his childhood, raised to be a weapon instead of a wolf. Saw the moment he'd taken the throne, barely 20 years old and already drowning under the weight of expectations. Saw 100 years of loneliness, of making impossible choices, of wondering if he would ever find someone who saw him as more than just a title. And he was seeing her. The girl who'd grown up hiding, who'd learned to make herself small and invisible. The daughter who'd watched her mother die. The wolf who'd spent 23 years believing she was broken, cursed, wrong. When the claiming bond finally settled, when they could breathe again, they were both crying. "I see you," Draven whispered against her lips. "All of you. Every scar, every fear, every beautiful, fierce piece of who you are. And I love it. I love you." The words should have terrified her. Should have felt too fast, too soon, too impossible. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I see you too," she replied, her hands fisting in his shirt. "And I think I might love you back. Even though you're infuriating and arrogant and entirely too certain about things you have no business being certain about." He laughed, the sound bright and genuine, and kissed her again. Softer this time. Tender. Like they had all the time in the world instead of being hunted by the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow would bring war. Would bring the council's full fury crashing down on them. Would bring choices and battles and a prophecy that still loomed over everything like a sword waiting to fall. But tonight, they had this. Had each other. Had a bond that nothing could break and a love that had bloomed in the most impossible circumstances. And for now, that was enough. They had 3 days of peace. 3 days where Sable and Draven stayed hidden in the sanctuary, learning each other through the bond, planning their next move. 3 days where the wild wolves she'd called continued to gather in the forest outside, forming a protective circle around them. Rogues and outcasts who'd heard whispers of a black Omega who didn't bow to alphas, who offered something different than the hierarchy that had rejected them. 3 days before everything shattered. It started with a howl. Not from the forest, but from inside Sable's mind. A warning shot through the bond from one of the wild wolves keeping watch. Someone was coming. Not shadow wolves this time. Something worse. An entire delegation. Draven felt it too, his body going rigid beside her. They'd been sitting by a small fire he'd built near the sanctuary entrance, sharing a meal of dried meat and berries he'd hunted for. Simple. Domestic. The kind of normalcy that felt precious because they both knew how fragile it was. "How many?" she asked, already on her feet. He closed his eyes, his alpha senses extending outward. When he opened them again, his expression was grim. 20 wolves. Maybe more. I recognize some of the power signatures, council members, their personal guards. But there's others I don't know. Wolves from the southern territories. The eastern packs. He met her gaze. They didn't come to negotiate, Sable. This is a war party. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stay calm. They'd prepared for this. Had known the council wouldn't just give up after Stellan's defeat. The wild wolves? 43 at last count. They'll fight if we ask them to. His jaw tightened. But most of them aren't trained warriors. They're survivors, yes, but not soldiers. Against council guards. He didn't need to finish. The wild wolves would be slaughtered. Then we don't fight, Sable said, her mind racing. Not yet. We meet them. See what they want. Maybe they've come to talk. Draven's laugh was bitter. They sent a war party, Sable. 20 wolves. That's not a delegation. That's an execution squad. Then why so many? She grabbed his arm, forcing him to focus. Think about it. If they just wanted us dead, they would have sent more elders, more shadow wolves. A strike force designed to overwhelm us before we could react. But this, she gestured toward the forest where she could feel the approaching wolves. This is a show of force. They want something from us. They want leverage. Understanding flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by dread. They want me to surrender you. Make it look like I'm choosing the kingdom over the bond. Would you? The question escaped before she could stop it, small and vulnerable in a way that made her hate herself. His answer was immediate, fierce. Never. I'd burn the kingdom to ash before I let them take you. The certainty in his voice should have comforted her. Instead, it terrified her. Because that was exactly what the prophecy warned about. Destruction. The kingdom in flames. All because of a bond between wolves who should have been enemies. Before she could respond, a voice called out from the forest. Loud. Commanding. Familiar. Alpha King Draven. We know you're in there. The council requests your presence. Alone. Sable's blood ran cold. Because she knew that voice. Had heard it 1,000 times growing up, warm and paternal and safe. Alpha Corvin. The wolf who'd killed her mother. The wolf who'd ordered her execution. He was here. Draven's hand found hers, squeezing tight. Stay behind me. Whatever happens, whatever they say. I know. She squeezed back. Trust no one but you. They emerged from the sanctuary together, and Sable had to fight to keep her expression neutral when she saw the wolves assembled in the clearing. 20 was an undercount. Closer to 30 now, all of them in human form, all of them radiating power and authority. Council members in their formal robes. Pack alphas from across the kingdom. Even a few faces she didn't recognize, wearing armor marked with symbols she'd only seen in her mother's old books. The ancient families. The bloodlines that predated even the council. They'd sent everyone who mattered. And at the center of it all stood Corvin. He looked different than she remembered. Older, with new lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. But his smile was the same. That practiced, politician's smile that had fooled her for years into thinking he cared about his pack, about the wolves under his protection. Sable. He said her name like they were old friends. Like he hadn't watched her mother die. You've grown. Powerful too, from what Elder Stellan reports. Your mother would be proud. The casual mention of her mother, spoken like Corvin hadn't been the one to order her death, made rage explode in Sable's chest. The black fire rose up, eager, hungry, wanting to reduce him to ash where he stood. Draven's hand tightened on hers. A warning. A reminder that they needed to hear what the council wanted before they started a war they might not win. Why are you here, Corvin? Draven's voice was pure alpha authority. The council wants to negotiate? Send a messenger. You brought an army. Not an army. Another voice, this one coming from Corvin's right. Elder Stellan stepped forward, his arms still bandaged from where Sable's flames had burned him. A diplomatic envoy. We're here to offer terms. Terms, Sable repeated, not bothering to hide her skepticism. You mean surrender. We mean survival. Stellan's pale eyes fixed on her with that same cold assessment. For all of us. The council has deliberated extensively since our last encounter. We've reviewed the old texts, consulted the prophecies, even brought in scholars from the ancient families to verify what we're dealing with. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You are the last firstborn. That much is confirmed. And your power is growing faster than any of us anticipated. At this rate, within a month, maybe 2, you'll undergo the second awakening. And when that happens, she becomes unstoppable, one of the ancient family representatives said, stepping forward. She was older, with silver white hair and eyes that held too much knowledge. The second awakening grants full access to firstborn magic. Reality manipulation. Elemental control. The ability to command any wolf, regardless of rank or bloodline. She looked at Sable with something that might have been pity. Your ancestors wielded that power with wisdom earned over centuries. You're 23 years old and have had your gifts for 3 days. You'll be like a child with a weapon you don't understand. Dangerous to everyone, including yourself. The words hit harder than Sable wanted to admit. Because the woman was right. She could barely control what she had now. The black fire responded to her emotions more than her will. If it got stronger, if she gained more power before she learned to master what she already had, she could destroy everything. Could become the monster the council believed she was. So you want to kill her before that happens, Draven said flatly. Eliminate the threat while she's still vulnerable. No, Corvin's voice cut through the tension, surprisingly gentle. We want to help her. Train her. The ancient families still have records, fragments of the old ways. We can teach her to control her power, to use it responsibly. To integrate her gifts into the kingdom's structure rather than letting them tear that structure apart. Sable's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. You want to train me? The same wolves who hunted my kind to extinction. Who killed my mother less than a week ago. You expect me to trust you? We expect you to be smart. Stellan's voice turned hard. Your mother's death was regrettable but necessary. She broke pack law by harboring you, by hiding what you were. Corvin acted within his rights as Alpha. But you, he gestured to her, to the sanctuary behind them, to the wild wolves watching from the shadows. You haven't broken any laws. You've simply awakened to your heritage. If you submit to council authority, allow yourself to be properly trained and integrated, there's no reason you can't have a place in this kingdom. A respected place. As what? Sable demanded. Your pet firstborn? Trotted out when you need my power but kept on a leash the rest of the time? As a bridge, the ancient family woman said quietly. Between the old ways and the new. The firstborn existed outside the hierarchy, yes. But they also maintained balance. Kept the alphas from becoming too tyrannical. Kept the omegas from being completely powerless. You could be that again, Sable. You could help us build something better. The offer was tempting. More tempting than Sable wanted to admit. Because wasn't that what she wanted? To stop running. To find a place where she belonged. To use her power for something other than just survival. But then her eyes found Corvin again, and she remembered her mother's screams. And what about him? She pointed at Corvin, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. What about the wolf who murdered my mother? Does he face justice? Or is his crime also regrettable but necessary? Silence fell over the clearing. The council members exchanged glances. Even Stellan looked uncomfortable. Corvin acted within pack law, he finally said. His actions, while harsh, were legal. Legal, Sable repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. My mother is dead, butchered in front of her entire pack, and you call it legal. I'm sorry for your loss, Corvin said, and the worst part was that he sounded sincere. Truly. Your mother was a good wolf. But she made choices that put the entire pack at risk. I did what I had to do to protect them. You did what you had to do to eliminate a threat to your authority, Draven said coldly. Let's not pretend this was about protection, Corvin. You've been consolidating power in the Southern Territories for decades. Anyone who challenges you ends up dead or exiled. Sable's mother was just the latest casualty. Corvin's friendly mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing something harder underneath. Careful, Alpha King. You may be mated to her now, but that doesn't change the fact that you're speaking to a council-sanctioned Pack Alpha. Show some respect. Respect is earned, Draven shot back. And you lost mine the moment you killed an innocent wolf to cover your own fears. The tension ratcheted higher, violence crackling in the air like static before a storm. The council guards shifted, hands moving to weapons. The wild wolves in the shadows growled low, warning. And Sable stood in the middle of it all, torn between rage and pragmatism, between the desire for vengeance and the desperate hope that maybe there was a path forward that didn't end in blood. Then Stellan played his final card. There's something else you should know, he said, pulling a scroll from his robes. The council has been investigating your bloodline, Sable. Trying to understand how a firstborn survived when we thought they were all gone. And we found something interesting. He unrolled the scroll, revealing what looked like a family tree. Names and dates and bloodline connections stretching back centuries. Sable's eyes tracked down the branches, finding her mother's name, her grandmother's, going back and back until she stopped breathing. Because there, 5 generations back, was a name she recognized. A name that shouldn't be there. Couldn't be there. Kieran Shadowborn. Draven's great-grandfather. The Alpha King who'd led the firstborn purge. No, she whispered, but Stellan was already speaking, his voice carrying to every wolf in the clearing. Your great-great-great-grandmother was Lysara Shadowborn. Kieran's younger sister. She was mated to one of the firstborn in secret, before her brother discovered what she was and had her executed for treason. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Which means, Sable, that you carry Shadowborn blood. The same bloodline as the Alpha King. The same bloodline as the wolves who tried to exterminate your kind. The world tilted. Sable's vision blurred, her mind refusing to process what she was hearing. She was descended from the monsters who'd hunted her ancestors. The blood of genocide ran through her veins alongside firstborn magic. She was the enemy and the victim all at once. You're lying, she said, but her voice was weak. Uncertain. I wish I were. Stellan's expression was almost sympathetic. But the records don't lie. You and the Alpha King aren't just mates, Sable. Your family. Distant, yes, but the connection is there. Which means this bond you formed isn't fate or destiny. It's just bloodline recognition. Your power calling to the only other wolves who share your ancestry. That's not, Draven started, but Corvin cut him off. It's true. We verified it with 3 separate bloodline seers. The bond you feel is real, but it's not what you think it is. It's not love. It's not even romantic. It's just 2 branches of the same corrupted family tree recognizing each other. He turned to Sable, his expression calculating. Which means you can break it. With proper training, proper guidance, you can sever the connection and choose a mate who isn't carrying the blood of your family's murderers. No. No, this wasn't right. Couldn't be right. Sable looked at Draven, desperate for him to deny it, to tell her the council was lying, manipulating them. But he wouldn't meet her eyes. You knew, she breathed, understanding crashing over her. You knew about the bloodline connection. That's why you came for me. Not because of fate. Because I was family. Because you could use me. No, Draven grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. I suspected a connection, yes. The way your power called to mine, it suggested shared ancestry. But I didn't know about Lysara. Didn't know the specifics. And even if I had, his voice dropped, urgent and desperate. Even if I had, it wouldn't change how I feel about you. Family or not, bloodline or not, what we have is real, Sable. You have to believe that. But she was drowning. Drowning in betrayal and confusion and the horrible realization that everything she'd believed about the bond might be a lie. That the one person she'd trusted, the one connection that had felt pure and true, was built on blood and manipulation and secrets he'd kept from her. You should have told me, she said, pulling away from him. The moment you suspected, you should have told me. I didn't tell you because it doesn't matter. Frustration and fear bled into his voice. What difference does it make if we share ancestors? We're still mates. Still bonded. Still. It makes all the difference. The words tore from her throat, raw and agonized. Because now I don't know if anything between us is real. If I chose you or if I was just following some genetic imperative to bond with someone from my own bloodline. If you wanted me or if you just wanted to control the last firstborn before someone else got to her. Sable, please. But she wasn't listening anymore. Couldn't listen. The black fire was rising inside her, responding to her emotional turmoil, and she could feel it slipping out of her control. Could feel the second awakening that the ancient family woman had warned about starting to claw its way to the surface, triggered by this emotional devastation. You need to leave, she said, backing toward the sanctuary. All of you. Before I lose control and hurt someone. We're not going anywhere, Stellan said firmly. This is exactly what we warned about. Your power responding to emotion rather than will. Let us help you, Sable. Let us teach you before it's too late. I said leave. The shout came out with a pulse of power that sent every wolf in the clearing staggering backward. The ground cracked. Trees groaned. And the black fire erupted from Sable's skin, not protective this time but destructive, hungry, wanting to burn away the pain and betrayal and horrible truth. The wild wolves scattered. The council guards drew weapons. And Draven stood frozen between two impossible choices, his mate or his kingdom. Sable didn't wait to see which he would pick. She turned and ran into the sanctuary, sealing it behind her with a wall of flame so intense it turned the stone around it molten. And as she collapsed in the center of the carved circle, as the second awakening began to tear through her body like lightning through flesh, one thought echoed through her shattered mind. She was completely, utterly alone. And maybe she always had been. The second awakening felt like dying and being reborn at the same time. Sable's body convulsed on the sanctuary floor, every nerve ending on fire as the firstborn magic tore through her in waves that threatened to shred her apart from the inside out. The carvings on the walls blazed so bright they burned afterimages into her vision. The ground beneath her cracked and reformed, responding to power she couldn't control, didn't understand, could barely contain. And through it all, she could feel Draven on the other side of the barrier. Feel his panic and desperation bleeding through the bond as he threw himself against her flames over and over, trying to reach her, trying to help even though she'd shut him out. Even though she'd told him to leave. He lied to you, the pain whispered. He knew about the bloodline and he kept it from you. Used you. But another voice, quieter but steadier, pushed back. He came for you when no one else would. Stood between you and death. Claimed you as his mate knowing it would cost him everything. She didn't know which voice to believe anymore. The visions came then, crashing over her like a tidal wave. Not gentle like the first awakening. This was violent, overwhelming, showing her everything at once. She saw the full history of the firstborn, not just the persecution and genocide but the time before. Saw her ancestors as they truly were. Powerful, yes, but also flawed. Capable of breathtaking beauty and horrifying cruelty in equal measure. She saw Lysara Shadowborn, her great-great-great-grandmother, young and beautiful and desperately in love with a firstborn male named Evander. Saw them meeting in secret, knowing their families would never approve. Saw them bond anyway, choosing each other over duty and politics and common sense. And she saw what happened when Kieran discovered them. Saw him drag Lysara before the council, watched his face twist with betrayal and rage as he declared his own sister a traitor. Saw Evander killed first, torn apart by shadow wolves while Lysara screamed. And then saw Lysara's execution, carried out by her brother's own hand, while she was already carrying Evander's child. A child who survived. Who was spirited away by sympathetic wolves and raised in hiding, bearing both shadowborn and firstborn blood. A bloodline that should have been impossible. That shouldn't have survived. But it had. Through 5 generations of hiding and fear and women who'd sacrificed everything to keep their daughters safe. All leading to Sable. The last one. The one who carried both legacies in her veins, the hunters and the hunted, the murderers and the victims, all of it tangled together in a way that couldn't be separated. You are the bridge, that ancient female voice said again, and this time Sable understood who she was hearing. Lysara herself, or some echo of her preserved in the firstborn magic. Between bloodlines. Between the old ways and the new. Between destruction and unity. This was always your destiny, child. From the moment you were conceived, you were meant to heal what Kieran broke. I don't want to heal anything. Sable screamed into the empty sanctuary, her voice raw. I want revenge. I want them to pay for what they did, to my mother, to my grandmother, to all of us. Revenge is easy, Lysara's voice replied, sad and knowing. Revenge is what Kieran chose when he discovered my secret. Look where it led. Centuries of bloodshed. Entire bloodlines wiped out. A kingdom built on fear instead of respect. A pause, heavy with meaning. Is that what you want your legacy to be? More death? More pain? Just continuing the cycle that destroyed your family? They killed my mother. The words came out broken, anguished. They took everything from me. I know. And you can make them pay. You have the power now. The second awakening is complete. You could burn down the council, destroy everyone who ever hurt you. The magic will follow your will. Another pause. But then what? After the ashes settle and the screaming stops, after you've had your revenge, what then? Will you be able to live with yourself? Will you be able to look at Draven, who carries Kieran's blood just as surely as you do, and not see the enemy? Sable didn't have an answer. Couldn't find one in the chaos of her mind. Choose carefully, daughter of 2 bloodlines. Because this choice isn't just about you. It's about every wolf in this kingdom. Every outcast and rogue who's been watching you, hoping you might offer them something better than what they've known. Every young wolf who will be born in the next century, who will inherit the world you create today. The visions faded, leaving Sable gasping on the floor as the last of the awakening fire burned through her system. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she saw her reflection in the polished stone of the altar. Her eyes were still black. But now they held stars. Literally, tiny points of light that moved and swirled like galaxies trapped in obsidian. Her skin glowed faintly with that dark fire, and when she held up her hands, she could see power moving beneath the surface like living shadow. She was fully awakened. Fully firstborn. And she had a choice to make. The barrier she'd erected still held, but she could feel Draven on the other side, could hear him calling her name, could sense his terror that she'd been consumed by the transformation. The bond thrummed between them, and now that she was thinking clearly, now that the emotional storm had passed, she could examine it properly. It wasn't just bloodline recognition. It was deeper than that. She could feel his essence intertwined with hers in a way that had nothing to do with shared ancestors and everything to do with two wolves finding their perfect complement. His ice to her fire. His ancient weariness to her fierce determination. His desire for peace to her hunger for justice. He hadn't lied to her. He'd simply not told her something he didn't think mattered. And maybe he'd been right. Maybe it didn't matter. They were who they were regardless of genetics. But trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Sable stood on shaking legs and faced the barrier. She could hear voices on the other side now, not just Draven but others. The council arguing. Corvin shouting orders. The wild wolves howling, agitated by the power fluctuations. Everything balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for her decision. Unite or destroy. Crown or dethrone. Life or death. She took a breath, centered herself, and made her choice. The barrier dissolved. Draven was through it instantly, his arms around her, his hands checking her for injuries even as relief poured through the bond so intensely it made her gasp. Thank the gods. I thought, when you sealed yourself in, when I felt the awakening starting. He pulled back, his eyes widening as he took in her changed appearance. Your eyes. Sable, your eyes. I know. Her voice was steady now. Calm. The second awakening is complete. Fear flickered across his face. Are you in control? Yes. She said it with certainty, and felt the truth of it. The power that had been so wild, so reactive before, now settled inside her like a second heartbeat. Responsive to her will but not enslaved by her emotions. I'm in control. Finally. The relief that crossed his face was almost painful to witness. I'm sorry. I should have told you about the bloodline connection the moment I suspected. I was afraid. He stopped, swallowed hard. I was afraid you'd think I was using you. That you wouldn't believe the bond was real. I know. Sable touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. I know why you didn't tell me. And I know the bond is real. I can feel it, Draven. Can feel you in a way that has nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with choice. We chose each other. That's what matters. His eyes closed, and she felt his gratitude wash through the bond. So we're okay? We're okay. She kissed him, brief but sincere. But we'll talk about communication and honesty later. Right now, we have a council to face. They emerged from the sanctuary together, and Sable saw that the clearing had transformed into a battlefield waiting to happen. The council forces had formed a defensive line, weapons drawn, power crackling around them. The wild wolves had responded in kind, spreading out in a loose circle, growling challenges. And at the center of it all stood Elder Stellan and Corvin, both of them radiating tension. Stand down, Sable called, her voice carrying with a power that made every wolf in the clearing flinch. All of you. No one fights today unless I say so. You don't have the authority, Corvin started, but Stellan held up a hand, silencing him. Let her speak. The elder's pale eyes assessed her, and she saw recognition there. Understanding. He knew what she'd become. Knew what the second awakening meant. You've completed the transformation. You're fully firstborn now. I am. Sable walked forward, Draven at her side, until she stood halfway between the two forces. Which means I have a choice to make. The prophecy spoke of unity or destruction. I can raise these wild wolves as an army and burn down the council for what you've done. What you've taken from me. And don't doubt that I could do it. I can feel the power now, understand it in a way I didn't before. I could reduce this entire clearing to ash before any of you could stop me. The council wolves tensed. The wild wolves howled, eager, hungry for the violence she was describing. But I won't. The words cut through the tension like a blade. Because that's what Kieran's Shadowborn did. That's what every Alpha who came after him did. Choose destruction out of fear. Choose violence over understanding. And look where it got us, centuries of bloodshed, entire bloodlines extinct, and a kingdom held together by terror instead of respect. She turned to face the wild wolves. I called you here because you deserve to know that someone saw you. That someone understood what it's like to be cast out, rejected, deemed unworthy by a system that never gave you a chance. And I'm not going to betray that by using you as weapons in my personal war. You deserve better than that. You deserve a choice. Then she faced the council. And you need to understand something. The old way is over. The hierarchy that puts alphas at the top and everyone else beneath them, that treats omegas like property and rogues like trash, that ends now. Not through destruction, but through transformation. I'm offering you a chance to build something new. Something better. Where power isn't about domination but about service. Where every wolf has value regardless of rank or bloodline. Stellan's expression was unreadable. And if we refuse? If the council decides your vision is too dangerous? Then you'll have your war. Sable's voice was hard now, uncompromising. Because I'm done hiding. Done running. Done letting wolves like Corvin kill innocent people because they're afraid of change. If you force my hand, I will fight. And I promise you, Elder Stellan, you won't win. Not against a firstborn who's learned to control her power. Not against every outcast and rogue who's been waiting for someone to stand up for them. Not against the Alpha King who's finally found something worth fighting for besides just survival. Draven stepped forward, his hand finding hers. A united front. She's right. The council's time is over. But that doesn't mean it has to end in blood. Work with us. Help us build something new. Or step aside and let those of us who are willing to change take the lead. Silence fell over the clearing. Sable watched the council members exchange glances, watched calculations happening behind their eyes. They were weighing options, considering odds, trying to determine if she was bluffing about her power. Then movement from the side. Corvin, his face twisted with rage, his power flaring. This is insane, he shouted. We're going to let an abomination and a traitor king dictate terms to us? We're the council. We are the law. He turned to his pack wolves. Seize them both. Now. But no one moved. Because Sable had learned something during the Second Awakening. Something about firstborn magic that the council didn't know. She couldn't command pack wolves. They were bound by alpha dominance, protected by those bonds. But she could influence them. Could show them truth in a way that bypassed logic and struck straight to the heart. She reached out with her power, not forcing, just offering. Showing Corvin's pack wolves who their alpha really was. Letting them see the fear beneath his bluster, the insecurity that drove his cruelty, the way he'd sacrificed others to protect his own position over and over again. And then showing them an alternative. A future where they had a voice. Where strength wasn't just about domination but about protecting those weaker than you. Where loyalty was earned, not demanded. One by one, Corvin's pack wolves stepped back. Lowering their heads. Not in submission to her, but in rejection of him. No, Corvin's voice cracked. No, you can't, I'm your alpha. You're bound to obey me. Alpha bonds can be broken, one of his wolves said quietly. An older female with scars marking her muzzle. When an alpha proves himself unworthy. When he betrays the trust we placed in him. She met Corvin's eyes steadily. You killed Sable's mother for your own political gain. Called it protection but it was just murder. And we stood by and let you because we were afraid of what you'd do if we challenged you. But we're not afraid anymore. Corvin's power flared, desperate, trying to force submission through sheer dominance. It didn't work. Because submission only works when those beneath you believe you're worthy of it. And Corvin had just lost that belief. He stood alone, abandoned by his pack, facing the consequences of decades of cruelty and manipulation. And in his eyes, Sable saw not just rage but fear. The same fear that had driven Kieran Shadowborn to genocide. The fear that had perpetuated the cycle of violence for centuries. She could kill him. Should kill him, probably, after what he'd done to her mother. The wild wolves wanted it, she could feel their bloodlust through the connection she'd formed with them. Even Draven wouldn't stop her if she chose vengeance. But Leora's words echoed in her mind. Is that what you want your legacy to be? No, Sable said, and she wasn't sure if she was answering Leora or the wolves or herself. No more killing. No more revenge. That's the old way. The way that destroyed everything worth preserving. She looked at Corvin, and felt nothing but pity. You're stripped of your alpha status. Your pack is free to choose a new leader. And you'll face trial for your crimes, real trial, not council justice where power determines outcomes. If you're found guilty, you'll serve whatever sentence they decide. If you're found innocent, she shrugged. Then the pack will decide whether to accept you back or exile you. You can't do this, Corvin whispered, but there was no conviction left in his voice. I just did. Sable turned away from him, facing the council. That's my offer. To all of you. Change with us or be left behind. Help us build something better or watch from the sidelines while we do it without you. But either way, the old hierarchy ends today. Elder Stellan was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. Not submission. Acknowledgement. You've won this round, Black Omega. The council will consider your proposal. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close to everything. But it was a start. And as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the clearing in gold and rose, Sable felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. 3 months later, Sable stood on the balcony of what had once been called the council chamber and was now simply known as the assembly hall. Below her, wolves gathered. Not just pack wolves, but rogues and outcasts who'd lived on the fringes for decades. Not just alphas, but omegas who'd never had a voice before. Families who'd been torn apart by the old hierarchy, now tentatively trying to rebuild in this new world that was still so fragile, so uncertain. The transformation hadn't been easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. Elder Stellan had kept his word, the council had considered her proposal. Argued about it for weeks. 3 of the 7 elders had refused outright, choosing exile over change. 2 had agreed with conditions. And 2, including Stellan himself, had shocked everyone by not just accepting but actively helping to dismantle the power structures they'd spent centuries maintaining. I'm tired, he'd told Sable during one of their late-night strategy sessions. Tired of ruling through fear. Tired of watching young wolves break under the weight of expectations they never asked for. If you can build something better, Black Omega, then I want to help. Even if it means giving up everything I've known. The packs had been harder to convince. Some had embraced the changes eagerly, like Corvin's former pack, who'd elected that scarred female, Mira, as their new alpha and had become one of the strongest voices for reform. Others had resisted, clinging to the old ways, viewing Sable as a threat rather than an opportunity. There had been battles. Small ones, thankfully. Challenges from alphas who thought they could defeat her, take her power, restore the old order. They'd learned quickly that a fully awakened firstborn wasn't something you defeated through brute strength. Sable had ended each confrontation without killing anyone, but the demonstrations of her power had been memorable. Effective. And through it all, Draven had stood beside her. Not as her protector or her controller, but as her partner. Her equal. They'd work together to draft new laws, new structures, new ways of organizing the kingdom that honored strength without making it the only thing that mattered. It was messy. Complicated. Filled with compromise and frustration and nights where they both wondered if they were making things better or just different. But it was working. Slowly, painfully, it was working. "You're brooding again," Draven's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "That's supposed to be my job." Sable leaned back into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her spine. The bond between them had only grown stronger over the months, deepening into something that felt less like fate and more like choice. Daily choice. The decision to keep choosing each other even when it was hard, even when they disagreed, even when the weight of what they were trying to build threatened to crush them both. "Just thinking," she murmured. "About how different everything is now. About my mother." Her voice caught slightly. "Wishing she could see this. See what we're building." "She can." Draven's arms tightened around her. "Maybe not physically, but I believe she knows. That all the firstborn who came before you, who sacrificed everything to keep the bloodline alive, they know. And they're proud." Sable hoped he was right. Hoped that somewhere, her mother was watching and understanding that her death hadn't been meaningless. That it had sparked something that couldn't be extinguished. Movement in the crowd below caught her attention. The wild wolves who'd answered her call that first night were there, integrated now into the new pack structures. Not forced to submit to alphas, but choosing to work alongside them. Equals. Partners. And there, at the edge of the gathering, she spotted a young girl. Maybe 12 years old, with dark hair and eyes that flickered between brown and black. Another firstborn. One they'd discovered living in hiding with her grandmother, terrified of what she was, convinced she was a monster. Sable had spent weeks with that girl, teaching her what she'd learned, showing her that power wasn't something to fear but something to understand and wield responsibly. And just yesterday, the girl had smiled for the first time. Had called Sable by name instead of Ma'am or Black Omega. Had asked if maybe, someday, she could be as strong and brave as Sable was. It had nearly broken her. Because she didn't feel strong or brave. She felt like she was making it up as she went along, stumbling through each day, hoping she was making the right choices. But maybe that was what courage actually was. Not the absence of fear or doubt, but moving forward despite them. "The assembly is about to start," Draven said quietly. "They're waiting for you." The assembly. Another one of their innovations. A gathering where any wolf could bring grievances, suggest changes, voice concerns. It was chaotic. Took forever to accomplish anything. And it was infinitely better than the old system where the council simply decreed and everyone else obeyed or died. "Ready?" Draven asked, pulling back to look at her. Sable turned in his arms, meeting those pale winter eyes that had first found her in a storm, that had seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. "No," she admitted. "I'm never ready. But I'll do it anyway." He smiled, fierce and proud. "That's my mate." They walked into the assembly hall together, and the gathered wolves rose. Not in submission. In acknowledgement. In recognition of what they were trying to build together. Sable took her place at the center of the circle, not elevated, not separated, but among them, and began. "We have a long agenda today," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Disputes to mediate. Proposals to discuss. And I know not everyone here agrees with how we're doing things. That some of you still think the old ways were better. That this," she gestured to the mixed assembly of alphas and omegas and rogues all sitting together, "this is chaos." Murmurs of agreement from some corners. But also sounds of support. And maybe it is chaos, Sable continued. Maybe we're fumbling through this, making mistakes, figuring it out as we go. But it's our chaos. Built on choice instead of force. On conversation instead of commands. And every day, we're learning. Getting better. Finding ways to honor both strength and compassion, both tradition and change. She paused, letting her gaze travel across the faces watching her. My mother died believing that wolves like me had no place in this world. That our power made us too dangerous, too different, too much of a threat to ever be accepted. And for most of my life, I believed that too. Spent every day trying to be smaller, quieter, less than what I was, because I thought that was the only way to survive. Her voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of everything she'd learned, everything she'd become. But I was wrong. And the wolves who taught me to fear myself were wrong. Because power isn't the problem. Fear is. Fear makes us cruel. Makes us eliminate anyone who threatens our sense of control. Makes us build hierarchies based on domination instead of cooperation. She looked at Draven, at Elder Stellan seated nearby, at Mira and the other new leaders who'd emerged from the old pack structures, at the young firstborn girl watching with stars in her eyes. So yes, we're in chaos right now. Yes, it's messy and difficult and sometimes it feels impossible. But I'd rather have difficult freedom than easy oppression. I'd rather stumble forward together than march in perfect formation towards something that only benefits a few at the cost of everyone else. Silence filled the hall. Then, from the back, one of the wild wolves stood. The Black Omega speaks truth. We follow. Another voice, this time from a pack Omega who'd never had the courage to speak in council sessions. We support the new ways. More voices, rising like a tide. Not unanimous. Never unanimous. But enough. More than enough. Sable felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Later, when she was alone with Draven, she would let herself feel the full weight of this moment. For now, she had work to do. Then let's begin, she said. First dispute, the territory issue between the northern and western packs. The assembly proceeded as it always did, part negotiation, part argument, part collective problem solving. It was exhausting. Frustrating. Beautiful. It was democracy, messy and imperfect and infinitely precious. Hours later, when the last dispute had been resolved and the last proposal voted on, when the wolves had dispersed back to their territories and their lives, Sable found herself back on the balcony, watching the sun set over a kingdom that was slowly, painfully, becoming something worth saving. Draven joined her, as he always did, 2 cups of tea in his hands. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from gold to rose to deep purple. Do you think we'll succeed? Sable asked quietly. Do you think we can actually make this work? Build something that lasts? Draven was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he finally said, and the honesty of it was somehow more comforting than false certainty would have been. What we're attempting has never been done before. We're literally rewriting centuries of tradition, trying to forge a new path with no map, no guarantee of success. We could fail spectacularly. Could watch everything we've built crumble. That's not very reassuring, Sable said, but she was smiling slightly. But, Draven continued, pulling her close, we could also succeed. Could create something that becomes the foundation for a better world. A world where young wolves like that firstborn girl don't grow up afraid of what they are. Where outcasts and rogues have a home. Where power serves rather than enslaves. He kissed her temple. And either way, success or failure, at least we tried. At least we stood up and said, this isn't good enough, we deserve better. Sable closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, winter pine and something uniquely him. I love you, she said. Simple words, but they carried everything. Gratitude. Trust. The bone-deep certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. I love you too, he replied. My fierce, impossible, revolutionary mate. They stood like that as darkness fell, two wolves who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd chosen to build rather than destroy, who'd dared to believe that change was possible even when everything suggested otherwise. And in the distance, a howl rose up. Then another. And another. The wild wolves, the pack wolves, the rogues and outcasts and families, all joining their voices in a song that was both ancient and entirely new. The song of wolves who were finally free. Would you have chosen her side? Would you have stood with the Black Omega when the entire kingdom called her an abomination? Would you have believed that one wolf, one bond, one impossible choice could change everything? Or would you have been among those who thought the old ways were safer? That power should stay where it had always been? That some wolves were simply meant to rule while others were meant to serve? The truth is, we all face these choices. Maybe not with magic and prophecies and ancient bloodlines. But every day, we decide whether to stand up for what's right even when it's terrifying. Whether to fight for change even when everyone tells us it's impossible. Whether to believe that we, broken, flawed, uncertain, might just be enough to make a difference. Sable started as a girl running for her life, believing she was a monster that needed to be hidden. She became a woman who changed a kingdom. Not because she was perfect. Not because she had all the answers. But because she chose courage over fear. Chose hope over vengeance. Chose to stand and fight for something better even when the world told her to submit or die. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the black fire or the ancient prophecies. But the simple, radical act of refusing to accept that things have to stay the way they've always been. Of believing that your voice matters. That your choice matters. That you matter. Is she a hero? Or just a girl cursed with too much fire and too much hope? Maybe she's both. Maybe that's what heroes actually are, ordinary people who refuse to let fear write the ending. If this story lit something inside you, if you felt Sable's pain, her rage, her desperate hope that the world could be different, then subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we tell tales that burn. Stories about wolves who refuse to bow, about mates who choose each other over kingdoms, about power that transforms instead of destroys. We tell stories about courage. About the kind of love that changes everything. About refusing to be what the world tries to make you. So hit that subscribe button. Join us in the fire. And let's see what other impossible stories we can tell together. Because your story matters too. And somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it.